The Gift of Cochise, Part 3. For more than 3 months, whenever he could wrestle the time, Chasseling courted the country over and back. The trouble was, he had no lead on the location of Edlo's homestead. An examination of Ed's horse revealed nothing. Lowe had bought seed and ammunition, and the seed indicated a good water supply, and the ammunition implied trouble. But in that country, there was always trouble. A man had died to save his life, and Chasseling had a deep sense of obligation. Somewhere that wife waited, if she was still alive, and it was up to him to find her and look out for her. He rode northeast, cutting for sign, but found none. Sandstorms had wiped out any hope of back-trailing Lowe. Actually, West Dog Canyon was more east than north, but this he had no way of knowing. North he went, skirted the rugged San Andres Mountains. Heat baked him dry, hot winds parched his skin. His hair grew stiff and dry, and alpaca whitened. He rode north, and soon the Apaches knew of him. He fought them at a lonely water hole, and he fought them on the run. They killed his horse, and he switched his saddle to the spare one and rode on. They cornered him in the rocks. He killed 2 of them and escaped by night. They trailed him through the white sands, and he left 2 more for dead. He fought fiercely and bitterly, and would not be turned from his quest. He turned east through the lava beds, and still more east to the Pecos. He saw only 2 white men, and neither knew of a white woman. The bearded man laughed harshly. A woman alone? She wouldn't last a month. But now the Apaches got her, and she's dead. Don't be a fool. Leave this country before you die here. Lean, wind-whipped, and a savage, Chasseling pushed on. The Meserados cornered him in rawhide draw, and he fought them to a standstill. Grimly, the Apaches clung to his trail. The sheer determination of the man fascinated them. Bred and born in the rugged and lonely land, the Apaches knew the difficulties of survival. They knew how a man could live, how he must live. Even as they tried to kill this man, they loved him, for he was one of their own. Lane's jeans grew ragged. 2 bullet holes were added to the old black hat. The slicker was torn, and the saddle, so carefully kept until now, was scratched by the gravel and dust. At night he cleaned his guns, and by day he scouted the trails. 3 times he found lonely ranch houses burned to the ground. The buzzard and the coyote stripped bones of their owners lying nearby. Once he found a covered wagon, its canvas flopping in the wind, a man lying sprawled in the seat with a pistol near his hand. He was dead, and his wife was dead, and their canteens rattled with empty skulls. Leaner every day, Chasseling pushed on. He camped one night in a canyon near some white oaks. He heard a hoof click on a stone, and he backed away from his tiny fire, gun in hand. The riders were white men. There were 2 of them. Joe Tompkins and Wiley Lynn were headed west, and Chasseling could have guessed why. They were men he had known before. He told them what he was doing. Lynn chuckled. He was a thin-faced man with a lanky yellow hair and dirty fingers. Seems a mighty strange way to get a woman. There's some as come easier. This ain't for fun, Chess replied shortly. I gotta find her. Tompkins stared at him. Chess, you're crazy. That gent declares himself in his own wish and desires. Far as that goes, The gal's dead. No woman would last that long in Apache country. As at daylight, the two men headed west, and Chest Lane turned south. Antelope and deer were curious creatures, often led to their death by curiosity. The longhorn, soon going west on the plains, acquires the same characteristic. He is essentially curious. Any new thing or strange action will bring his head up and his ears alert. Often a longhorn, like a deer, can be lured within a stone's throw by some queer antic, by a handkerchief waving, by a man under a hide, by a man on foot. This character of wild things holds true to the Indian. The lone rider who fought so desperately and knew the desert so well soon became the subject of gossip among the Apaches. Over the fires of many rancheria they discussed this strange rider who seemed to be going nowhere but always riding, like a lean wolf dog on a trail. He rode along the mesas and down the canyons. He studied sign at every water hole. He looked from every ridge. It was obvious to the Indians that he searched for something. But what? Part 4. Cochise had come again to the cabin in the West Dog Canyon. "Little warrior too small," he said, "too small for hunt. You join my people. Take Apache for man." "No," Angie shook her head. "Apache ways are good for the Apache, and white man ways are good for white man and women." They rode away and said no more. But that night, as she had on many other nights after the children were asleep, Angie cried. She wept silently, her head pillowed on her arms. She was as pretty as ever, but her face was thin, showing the worry and struggle of the months gone by, the weeks and months without hope. The crops were small but good. Little Jimmy worked beside her. At night, Angie sat alone on the steps and watched the shadows gather down the long canyon, listening to the coyotes yapping from the rim of the Cochise, hearing the horses blowing in the corral. She watched, still hopeful, but now she knew that Cochise was right. Ed would not return. But even if she had been ready to give up this, the first home she had known, there would be no escape. Here she was protected by Cochise. Other Apaches from other tribes would not be so willing to grant her peace. At daylight she was up. The morning air was bright and balmy, but soon it would be hot again. Jimmy went to the spring for water, and when breakfast was over the children played while Angie sat in the saddle of a huge old cottonwood and sewed. It was Sunday, warm and lovely. From time to time she lifted her eyes and looked down the canyon, half smiling at her own foolishness. The hard-packed earth of the yard was swept clean of dust. The pans hanging on the kitchen wall were neat and shining, and the children's hair had been clipped, and there was a small bouquet on the kitchen table. After a while, Angie put aside her sewing and changed her dress. She did her hair carefully, and then, looking in her mirror, she reflected with a sudden pain that she was pretty and that she was only a girl. Resolutely she turned from the mirror and took up her Bible and went back to the seat under the cottonwood. The children left their playing and came to her, for it was a Sunday ritual, their only one. Opening the Bible, she read slowly. "Although I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou—" "Mommy!" Jimmy tugged her sleeve. "Look!